Down in RE, we ring this bell, often to begin our circles together, and we listen to its vibration as it moves out into the circle, and we see how long we can hear it. And we listen to our breath as we listen to its vibrations. So kids, I'm gonna ring it one more time, and then we're gonna start our story. So I think people are mostly in position for that. Yeah. All right, let's listen to this bell one more time. And if you'd like, you can raise your hand when you can no longer hear the vibrations of its sound. I see we have some very powerful ears in this congregation. So I'm going to tell a story today for the winter solstice called Spiral of Light. Once upon a time, there was a sweet family who lived in the woods surrounded by trees and animals and nature. Theirs was a simple life. They planted their seeds in the springtime. They tended their garden and their green shoots and harvested the summer's bounty as the fruits ripened on the vine. They would spend hours in the forest, harvesting the gifts from the trees, making maple syrup in the late winter and collecting acorns in the autumn. They knew where all the different animals made their houses. There was a bear that lived in a rocky ledge over there. And there were also bunnies over there, and a little wolf pup actually lives with the bunnies. There were also some fairies way over there by the bubbling brook and the rushing stream, but you were lucky if you could ever see them. And there were also foxes that lived in a beautiful den all covered in leaves that was very hard to see. But those kids knew the forest so well that they knew where the foxes lived and where they slept during the day and made their rounds at night. So those kids would go on walks through the woods, leaving offerings for the different animals. They would leave jewels for the fairies. They would leave carrot tops for the bunnies and trimmings of vegetables. If they want to walk around with baskets that are under the table, they can. And they would make fairy houses for those fairies and watch as the jewels would disappear, and they knew that those fairies had taken them to decorate their homes with. And every year, as the sun began to set earlier and earlier in the evening, and the light slanted across the land and came through their windows, the family would harvest beeswax from their bee boxes, and they would make candles for that shortest day of the year. And they would light these candles to keep the shadows at bay and illuminate their little cabin. Now this year, as they went on their daily walks to leave their offerings for the animals, they noticed that everything was a little bit strange. They came to the place where the bunnies lived, but those bunnies, instead of scampering away and darting through the forest and the snow, they just sat there, kind of slow and confused and not frisking about and running like bunnies should. And as they walked, they noticed that the squirrels weren't skittering up the trees. They were just sitting on the ground. When have you ever seen a squirrel just sit, not even flicking its tail? And then the kids visited the fairies. They realized that the fairy houses were in disrepair. The gifts they had left for them weren't being taken. They were still there from weeks ago. what was happening in this forest? And then the kids came to where the bear lived, in the rocky cliff. And that bear, usually he would be sleeping at this time of year, but instead, he's moaning and groaning and growling and trudging along as if the weight of the world is just too much for him, and he's trying to shake it off and rub it off. And those kids were very surprised that this bear was acting in such a bizarre way. They knew that this bear was usually gentle and just lumbered around on the hills gathering berries in the autumn, and he should have been sleeping right now. So eventually they went home. They talked to their parents and told their parents everything they'd seen in the forest that day. But when they came home, this was the night before the winter solstice, and they tried to light their candle from the beeswax they had gathered. But this is the strangest part of their day. They tried to light that candle, but instead of light, it started throwing shadows on the wall. The shadows got deeper and darker. And the kids and the parents, they started to feel a new emotion in their hearts. Instead of the joy that this season usually brings, they started to feel fear. They were really, really worried about what could be happening to the animals and the trees, and now their candle that's not even bringing light into their little home. No one had the heart to gather around their fireplace that night. They usually sat around their little fire and told stories and sang songs, but the fire was kind of smoky, and they couldn't even remember the songs that they usually sang. So the family went to bed that night without the light that usually lights their house. So now I would like to invite you to join me in the ritual of sharing our joys and concerns and care. So, back in our story, the next morning, the family woke up and the smallest child said, "It's so cold and dark, and I feel it in my heart like all the light is gone." And another child spoke up and said, "I think it's up to us to find out what happened to that light." And those children, they knew the forest really well, and they loved walking their familiar paths. So they decided they would venture back out into the forest to find the light. And they carried their lantern with them, even though the candle wasn't lit. And they stopped at each of their regular spots. They stopped to visit the bear. They stopped and visited the bear, and they asked, "Oh, wise grandfather bear, we're looking for the light. Have you seen where it has gone?" But that bear, he just shrugged and rolled around a little more, trying to get rid of whatever this sadness and weight and fear was holding him down. So the children moved on to the bunnies, and they asked the same question of the bunnies: "Where has this light gone?" But everywhere they went, the answer was the same. The animals were just slow and lethargic. They visited the foxes one more time, but those foxes, they weren't hibernating. They were just sadly sitting quietly. So by now, the sun had set, as it set so early in the winter. And the children came to this clearing right here in the center of the forest. And there was no light coming from their candles. They felt afraid. They realized that they were holding all this heaviness and cold in their hearts and this great weight of fear ever since their candles failed to brighten their house. But as they looked around, they saw that the animals had slowly crept out into the forest. The foxes had come to sit under a pine tree, and those little bunnies and that baby wolf, they slowly came out, and the children started to feel a little less afraid. Even the big old bear roared over. And as they gathered in that clearing, all the animals and all the children, they saw that snow was starting to fall. It felt heavy and thick and white, and as they watched, they moved out of the clearing, and they saw that clearing was starting, the snow was falling in some kind of pattern. As the snow fell, it left a spiral of white. The pine needles and grasses were showing up through that spiral, and the white sparkling snow left a pathway. And the kids stood on the outside of that clearing, and they slowly started to feel a little more brave. And they looked down and they realized there were lanterns for each kid and each animal. They picked up their lanterns and they thought about this dark time of year. They thought about the fear that was, they thought about the fear that they had been holding in their hearts. And they thought about what they love about the winter. The light hadn't quite come back yet. So they thought about what they love about the winter. And one by one, they started walking the spiral path. I'm wondering if you guys can help me think about what you love about the winter. What brings you joy? What warms your heart in this darkest, coldest time of year? Just sound out. So deep. Hot chocolate. I hear hot chocolate, but I can't.
Sunlight. Sunlight.
Sunlight, the sun that still comes through. And the snow, playing in the snow, building snow people and animals. And Christmas! Calico! And Calico! And fire! And what?
And blue, deep blue sky.
And the deep blue sky. Anything else you love about winter?
The leaves that are still on the ground.
The leaves that are still on the ground.
The evergreen.
And the evergreens. And we're seeing the snow land on those evergreens.
Holly.
And the holly.
Blue starry nights.
And what?
Blue starry nights.
And the clear starry night.
And the beautiful bare trees.
And the beautiful bare trees. And Linda? Yes, the bare trees where you can see between their branches, you can see those starry nights.
The hissing of steam radiators.
The hissing of steam radiators.
And those kids and those animals, they felt all this joy for this beautiful time of year. And as they felt that joy, a miracle happened. Their lantern that they had been carrying empty all these days suddenly lit with light. And all the lanterns that all the animals were holding also lit up with light. Just like their hearts as they thought of all this beauty that surrounded them. And as their light lit, and after all their lights were lit, they walked back out of their spiral. And as they walked, they started hearing this beautiful song coming through the trees from the sky. It was their solstice labyrinth song. And if you know it, you could be one of those voices from the forest in your order of service.